I've been a truck driver for over 10 years, so I've been on all roads, both the busiest and the most isolated. I've never been one to believe in horror stories or things like that. I always thought this was something people did who had nothing to do. But after this, I don't know what to think anymore. I was taking a long trip, one of those routes that cross huge forest areas, and night had already fallen when I saw a man on the side of the road. He was standing, right in the middle of nowhere, wearing a camouflage vest, which immediately made me think he was a hunter. But he didn't seem lost at all, which surprised me. I don't know why, but I decided to stop. The guy was a little off the road, and the only thing I could do was offer him a ride to the next gas station, if he was going in that direction. He climbed up quickly, barely making a sound, and was soon sitting next to me, looking out the window with a calm that made me uneasy. The way he sat, so relaxed, he seemed disconnected from anything real, as if he were a person who had lost track of time and place. "You think forests keep secrets, don't you?" He spoke suddenly. I didn't know what to answer, so I stayed quiet. When I looked at him, the man seemed to speak with the calm voice of someone who already knew everything that was going to happen. He seemed to watch me more than I watched him, and at that moment I started to feel a little uncomfortable. He kept looking at me, as if trying to understand what I was thinking. And when he spoke, it wasn't as if he was telling a story, but as if it were a conversation he'd had 1,000 times before. He started talking about the ancients, as if the past were more present than the future. His words were like some kind of riddle, and he seemed more interested in saying mysterious things than actually explaining what was happening. "Sometimes, there's more to the person on the road than they seem," he said, with a small smile on his face. "Have you ever seen the glow of eyes in the night?" I didn't know what to say, so I just mumbled something, trying to keep the conversation going, but the feeling of discomfort only increased. Something about those words didn't sound right, and the fact that he was wearing a camouflage vest made me think that he was, in fact, a hunter, but a hunter of what? The road was increasingly deserted. I knew I was near a patch of dense forest, but this felt different. The trees, which before seemed just part of the landscape, now seemed to be watching us, as if they were waiting for something. I tried changing the subject, talking about the weather, anything to break the awkward mood. But he continued with the same soft, unhurried speech, as if what he had to say was more important than anything I was going to say. "Have you heard about the missing drivers around here? It's no coincidence, you know," he said, voice lower now, with a tone that made me shiver. My head started spinning. Drivers disappearing? I knew the stories, but I always thought it was just hearsay. It was said that some drivers, lone travelers, were never seen again after entering that part of the road. Nobody knew how to properly explain what was happening. Some said they were encounters with drug traffickers, others spoke of mysterious accidents, but no one ever dared to consider something more supernatural. He continued, not caring what I thought. "What happens here is not normal. But you will find out soon. Everyone does. The question is how far you will go before you see the truth." That was when the atmosphere became even heavier. The car, which until that moment had been running smoothly, started to give out engine failure, something I had never seen before. I still couldn't believe it was happening, but the engine failed once again, and for a second, the road ahead seemed to stretch away, as if it were closing in. The man next to me looked at me with a smile that wasn't a smile. It was a smile of someone who already knew what would happen. "Sometimes the road chooses who it wants to see again," he said. And it was only at that moment that I felt the true sensation of danger. Something was wrong, and I was stuck there with him. I stopped the truck on the side of the road, feeling a cold sweat running down my forehead. The guy next to me didn't seem to care that I was panicking. He was in a trance, as if he were somewhere else. With every second that passed, the feeling that that road was no longer the same grew. The trees were taller, the darkness thicker, and the air thicker. I felt like I was being swallowed by that jungle. The man looked at the forest, and the smile on his face widened. "You're very close to the truth now. Just don't ask me what happens next." The engine noise continued to be strange, as if the truck was resisting running. I looked at the man next to me once again, and something in his eyes stopped me in my tracks. It wasn't fear, nor anger, but something deeper, darker, as if he knew something I couldn't understand. He was no longer there, physically. It was as if he were part of the night, part of the forest. Those words about seeing the truth were still ringing in my head. What did he mean by that? What was the truth? But before I could question him further, he simply looked at me and said, "Your time has come." It was then that I heard something in the forest. It wasn't a normal noise, like animals or wind. It was a kind of dragging, a slow, heavy thing, as if something big was moving towards the truck. My throat tightened. I looked in the rearview mirror, trying to see something, anything. But the road behind us was too dark, and the forest seemed to have come closer than before. The man next to me didn't seem to care what was going on. He was calm, as if this was all normal. And suddenly, I felt it. I knew something was about to happen. Something I couldn't control. The tension on the road was broken by a scream. A long, distorted scream came from the forest, followed by a sound that sounded like metal scraping over stone. I froze. I didn't know if I should continue or if it was too late to try to escape. But the man just turned his head towards the forest, as if he had expected it. "They are waiting. And now you are part of it too." I don't know what he meant by that. I only know that, at that moment, something cold took over me, and the feeling of being watched, that there was something else there, became unbearable. I accelerated the truck without thinking. The engine suddenly started again, as if it had been healed by some supernatural power. I looked to the side, and the man was no longer there. That stranger with the camouflage vest had disappeared out of nowhere, as if he had never been there. Only then did I realize what he meant. He was no ordinary hunter. He was part of something much bigger. The road, the forest, those disappearances. It was all part of a cycle. Something I probably shouldn't have discovered. To this day, the road remains the same, and the only thing I can say is that some stories, like that one, never have an explanation. No matter how hard you try to understand. And, honestly, I never went back to that road again. I always took this route. The same winding road, the same sharp midnight curve, always the same engine sound, the same feeling of loneliness. But that night, something was wrong. I knew that the road started to get emptier after passing through the small town, but I never felt so uncomfortable. I was driving alone, as usual, and the darkness seemed thicker than usual. The truck's headlight cut through the night, illuminating the road, but with every turn I made, the landscape seemed different. It was subtle, but I noticed it. The trees seemed closer, the fog thicker. I knew I had turned the same corner before, but it didn't feel the same. The first time this happened, I thought it was all in my head. The road itself was a little too familiar. I passed a section with tall trees and an open area, as always, but what caught my attention was that, at the next bend, the same trees were there again, in exactly the same place. It wasn't possible. I hadn't come back, I was sure. But at the second corner, everything looked identical. I was forced to slow down, and with the truck slower, I was able to see details that I hadn't noticed before. The setting had a strangeness to it. The trees seemed twisted in a way I didn't remember, and the road was narrower than it should have been. I tried to convince myself that I was just tired, that maybe it was sleep making me see things. Then I accelerated again, to get rid of the sensation, but soon, when I took the bend, there it was again, the same landscape. The same place. The same curve. I could have sworn that even the smell of the air was the same. The fog, which had previously seemed more distant, was now thicker, as if it had become heavier, more dense. I remained silent, just listening to the truck's engine and the sound of the tires on the asphalt. Something was wrong, but I couldn't explain what. The road was making me nervous. In the third corner, panic began to set in. I looked in the rearview mirror and for a second I thought I saw something moving through the trees. But there was nothing there when I looked again. I took a deep breath and tried to rationalize, forcing myself to believe that there was nothing more than a tired mind that was starting to lose its way. But the road remained the same, and the feeling of being stuck in a loop intensified. Every turn, every stretch, seemed to be the same as the last. As if I were returning to the same place, over and over again. I looked at the GPS, trying to check my location, but it only showed me the same road, as if there was no starting or ending point. I couldn't keep calm anymore. I was starting to question my sanity. I've been there before, I thought, but at the same time I couldn't understand how the road could look so different and so the same at the same time. Each time I passed the same curve, I began to see more details that I hadn't noticed before, as if the environment was changing right before my eyes, but without me actually moving anywhere else. The feeling of déjà vu was unbearable. I looked at the truck's dashboards, trying to find something familiar, something that would tell me I was still on the same path, but the odometer numbers were all jumbled up, illogical. As if the road had begun to corrupt time too. That's when I noticed something even stranger. The trees, which had previously looked normal, were now moving. I knew they weren't the wind, because there was no wind. They leaned toward the road as if they were watching me, as if something inside them was alive. I looked to the side and felt a shiver run down my spine. The trees were getting closer. Not physically, but something about the way they looked seemed off. As if they were trying to swallow me. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to convince myself it was just tiredness. But when I opened them, the trees were exactly where they were before. The same curve. The same distorted vision. With each new turn of the road, the fear increased. The landscape repeated itself and, with it, the feeling that I was trapped. In a nightmare. I knew I had already passed that part of the road. I knew. But at every turn, the feeling of starting over, never ending, became more oppressive. The sound of the engine seemed more distant, more muffled. I looked to the side, and the reflection of the truck's lights on the trees gave the impression that they were closer, more threatening. I didn't know if the road was taking me back or if it had simply lost all logic. There was nowhere else to go. Every turn was the same. Confusion mixed with panic. I didn't know if I was going crazy, if I was really stuck in a loop, or if there was something else going on there. I began to slow down, hoping that the slower movement would help me understand what was happening, understand what was real and what was just my mind betraying me. But suddenly, in the middle of the next curve, the truck's headlights went out. The road was plunged into total darkness. The silence dragged on like a palpable presence. I could almost hear my heart beating. I looked around and, for the first time, realized that the trees were no longer just moving. They were breathing. I stopped the truck there, in the middle of the road, in the absolute pitch black. The silence was so oppressive that it seemed to swallow even the sound of my own breathing. There were no longer the city lights on the horizon, nor the truck's headlights illuminating the road. It was as if the world had disappeared, and all that was left was that road, that curve that never ended. Fear paralyzed me. I looked in the rearview mirror, trying to see something, anything, but there was nothing. The reflection was just darkness. The feeling of being watched, that something or someone was behind me, became unbearable. Suddenly, a faint light appeared in my vision. It was a distant light, but it seemed to get closer. I recognized it immediately. It was a car headlight. I felt relieved, as if someone was finally coming to save me. But as the light got closer, I saw it wasn't a car. It was another truck, with a bright cabin and headlights on, but the truck was stopped, as if it was waiting for me. I frowned. I was sure there were no more trucks on that road. Fear turned to dread. I didn't know if it was a hallucination or something more, but as the truck stopped next to me, the driver didn't move, didn't make a sound, didn't even make a gesture. It was at that moment that whatever that thing in front of me was, the thing in the road, appeared. It was a dark figure, almost human in shape, but deformed. She was standing in front of the truck, motionless, as if she was waiting for me. I turned the engine key, trying to start the truck again, but the engine didn't respond. The noise of the road became muffled, as if it were being drowned out by the very darkness that had closed in around me. The figure didn't move, but I could feel the weight of its presence. The air became thick, hot and humid. I tried to scream, but my throat felt dry, like there was no air left. I don't know how long I stayed there. I don't know if it was a minute or an eternity. All I know is that suddenly the figure disappeared. The road became silent and empty again. The truck started on its own, as if it had been reanimated by something invisible. I accelerated without thinking, and as the road opened up in front of me, it seemed like everything was back to normal. But I knew it wasn't. I knew I had seen something. I knew something was following me now. I don't know if I was just going crazy or if the road had taken me to a place where time didn't make sense. But, to this day, I can't understand what happened. And every time I take that route again, the feeling that I'm trapped, that I'm reliving that nightmare, never leaves me. I was driving alone, as usual, on that long, deserted road. The night was quiet, windless, and the only thing I could hear was the sound of the truck's engine and the low music on the radio. I had been on the road for hours and there was no sign of another vehicle. It wasn't the first time I'd been there, but something that night seemed different. I was starting to feel strange, like the road was taking me somewhere I shouldn't be. When I pressed the radio button to change the station, the music was interrupted by a strange transmission. It was a muffled voice, full of static, as if it was struggling to be heard. At first, I thought it was some interference, but the voice started to get clearer, and I soon realized that it wasn't just any voice. She was asking for help, saying there was an accident, something that had happened years ago on that same road. The voice sounded desperate, and with each word, the fear became more evident. "I'm here. I can't leave, there's something here," she said repeatedly, as if trapped. With each repetition, the tone of the voice became more anguished, more desperate. I remained silent, listening to that, trying to understand what was happening. I looked around, but the road was empty, with no one in sight. The voice remained the same, and the radio suddenly began to hiss even louder, as if trying to break through space itself. I turned up the volume, trying to capture more words. The voice mentioned a name that seemed familiar to me, but I couldn't understand where it came from. I couldn't concentrate because the feeling of being watched increased with each word. The voice sounded close, as if it were in the truck with me. I tried to turn off the radio, but I couldn't. The button didn't respond, as if it were stuck. The radio's hiss became more intense and, for a moment, all I heard was that sound. The voice, broken by the static, became clearer. "You will arrive, you will see what happened, don't run away, there is no way to run anymore." I felt a shiver run down my spine, and my heart sped up. I knew something was wrong. The road, the voice, the feeling of being guided, everything told me that something dark was happening there, and I was on the wrong path. The voice on the radio became more urgent. "You have to understand. It wasn't an accident, they're here, they're still here," she whispered. I was starting to panic, fear spreading through my body like ice. I looked around once more, trying to find something familiar, some landmark that would tell me I was still in control, that I was still safe. But the road seemed more closed, the trees on the side darker, as if they had advanced onto the road. The radio, increasingly distorted, emitted disjointed words, but the tone of the voice was still clear. "Slow down, you're getting close." It was then that I started to notice something strange. The trees passing by the truck window, those same trees I had seen so many times, now looked different. They were closer, as if they were growing towards the road. I looked in the rearview mirror, and the light from the headlights didn't reflect the trees in the same way. Everything was distorted, as if I were entering another place, another time. The radio failed for a moment and, when it came back on, the voice was no longer the same. Now it seemed distant, as if someone was trying to speak to me from a very distant place. "Here, here, it was here," the voice murmured, and the static grew unbearable. The despair in my mind began to grow, and I began to question my own sanity. I had driven this road dozens of times before, but now it seemed like everything was different. The feeling that there was something following me, something that was watching me as I passed, was palpable. I tried to ignore it, trying to focus on the path, but I couldn't. At each turn, it seemed that the landscapes changed imperceptibly, as if I were passing through a repeated scenario, a scenario in which the accident that the voice mentioned had been trapped in time, waiting for me. Suddenly, I passed a curve that I recognized. But something was wrong. The curve seemed tighter, and the terrain in front of me, which I knew well, was now strange, with a gorge that I swore I'd never seen. I braked immediately, my heart pounding. The radio was silent, but the feeling that there was something there, in front of me, made me get out of the truck. I walked to the side of the road, and at that moment the voice came back, clearer than ever. "Now you know. There's no point in running away." I looked at the road and, in the distance, I saw something. A shadow moving in the trees, in the direction of where I was. I didn't know if I should run or face what was there, but I knew I couldn't go back. The shadow in the trees started to move faster, as if it was following me. The sound of static on the radio returned, louder now, almost deafening, and the voice became even more distorted. "You're not leaving. You're not leaving, not after you know." The air felt heavier, denser. I took a step back, but something held me back. It wasn't a physical force, but a feeling that I shouldn't get out of there, as if the road was holding me there, waiting for me to stay forever. I looked ahead at the canyon and saw something reflecting in the truck's lights. It was a piece of metal, something that seemed to have been left behind, but somehow it was calling to me. I approached cautiously, and the fear in me increased as I realized what was before me. It was an abandoned truck, turned on its side, with tire marks that looked like they had been made a long time ago, but were still visible. The smell of burning rubber was in the air, and for a moment I could almost hear the sound of impact, the crash of the crash. I crouched near the truck, the radio now completely silent, but the feeling that I was inside a nightmare had never been stronger. As if I were living a scene that had already occurred, a scene that was doomed to repeat itself. Suddenly, an icy sensation ran down my spine. I heard a low voice, almost a whisper, coming from the abandoned truck. "You see. Now you know what happened." I looked around, looking for any sign of life, but there was no one. The truck was empty. And then, in the reflection in the rearview mirror, I saw what I didn't want to see. The road behind me, which I swore I had gone by, was there again. Same curve, same tree. As if the path was beginning to close in on me, as if I were trapped, condemned to relive that moment forever. Panic gripped me, and I ran back to the truck. I needed to get out of there. I needed to leave, but the path no longer seemed to be the same. Every turn now felt like a repeat of what I had already experienced. The radio, however, did not work again. The voice was gone, but the feeling of being watched, of being part of something I couldn't control, never left me. I sped up, and for a moment I thought I was free. But as the road stretched out before me, I couldn't help but think, had I really left? Or was it the road that had somehow imprisoned me? It was an ordinary trip, one of those long ones that I've done so many times. The road was empty, just me and darkness, with the constant sound of the truck's engine and headlights cutting through the night. I was starting to feel the weight of fatigue, my eyes were burning, my mind was wandering. The road was familiar, but that night, there was something strange in the air. I didn't know exactly what it was, but something bothered me. The hours passed slowly, and the solitude of the road seemed denser. That's when I noticed something in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was all in my head. It was just a reflection, a distortion in the light made by the truck's headlight. I wasn't used to paying attention to such small details, but for a moment I thought I saw a figure moving behind me. I took a quick look, but there was nothing. Just the empty path behind me, as always. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the strange feeling, but when I looked in the rearview mirror again, something caught my attention. It was subtle, but now I saw a shadow. It wasn't a big deal, but it was enough to make me feel like there was someone there, even though I was completely alone. I thought I was becoming paranoid, that the road was getting to me, that the endless miles were starting to get on my nerves. But when the shadow became clearer, my body reacted, as if my instinct was telling me it wasn't just imagination. I looked in the rearview mirror more closely, and the figure was there, clearer. It was a human shape, but not perfectly defined. As if it were only partially visible, floating. My stomach tightened, and I almost lost control of the truck. I looked at the road ahead, trying to convince myself it was just my mind, but I couldn't take my eyes off the reflection. The figure seemed to be closer now. I didn't understand how this was possible. I was on a deserted road, with no one around, and the only thing that should have been there was my own image in the rearview mirror. But with each passing minute, the figure became clearer, more defined. It was like she was getting closer to me, like she was following me. I tried to look to the side to check if anyone was behind the truck, but there was nothing. The silence of the night was oppressive, and the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me only increased. The worst happened when the figure in the rearview mirror started to move. At first, it seemed to just float behind me, but now, its contours were more defined. I could see the silhouette of a body, or at least what appeared to be a body, approaching, as if it were walking behind the truck. I didn't know if I was starting to go crazy or if tiredness was taking over me more deeply than I imagined. But for a moment, I was sure something wasn't right. I looked in the rearview mirror again, and the figure was closer, more real. I could even see the details of the outfit she was wearing, a dark type of jacket. I didn't know what to do. What I was seeing didn't make sense. I was alone on the road, there was no one behind me, and whatever that figure was, it shouldn't have been there. I tried to speed up the truck, as if that would solve the problem, but the movement of the road only made the figure become clearer, closer. When I looked in the rearview mirror again, I saw something that made me stop the truck immediately. The figure was no longer in the reflection. Now, instead, there was a presence, a black shadow taking up most of the rearview glass, as if something had materialized directly behind me. I almost couldn't breathe. My body reacted instinctively. I turned the steering wheel, almost losing control, and stopped abruptly in the middle of the road. I didn't know what to do. My mind was spinning, trying to process what was happening, but I couldn't understand it. The radio, which until that moment had been quiet, began to hiss, and a low voice, almost a whisper, came out of it. I couldn't understand the words, but the feeling that someone, or something, was trying to communicate with it chilled me to the bone. The shadow in the rearview mirror was still there, thicker, and it seemed to be watching me more insidiously now, as if it had been waiting for me. The road was now completely silent, and the sound of the truck's engine seemed more distant. Time seemed to have stopped, as if everything around me was on pause, waiting for something to happen. I looked in the rearview mirror once more, and the figure was no longer there. But there was no relief. Something was still present. It was a feeling that I was being watched, that I was no longer alone. The image of the figure and the feeling that something had followed me all the way down the road were burned into my mind, and somehow I knew the presence wouldn't go away. I tried to get out of the truck and look around, but as I did so, the feeling of something watching me became even more intense. The trees along the road, which had previously looked ordinary, were now dark and dense, as if they were closer than they should have been. The air felt heavier, and the temperature had dropped inexplicably. I looked in the rearview mirror once more, but the shadow was gone. There was nothing else visible except the normal reflection of the truck, but the feeling that something was there, out of sight, didn't dissipate. I took a deep breath and got back into the truck, trying to stay calm, but my mind was in a frenzy. I knew there was no one else on the road, but something told me that what I was seeing in the rearview mirror wasn't normal. I tried to start it and get back on the road, but the engine hesitated, as if it too was reluctant to move forward. When I finally turned it on, the headlight cut through the darkness again, and the road seemed emptier than ever. But something inside me knew I wasn't alone. The journey continued, but the feeling of being followed did not disappear. Every curve, every stretch of road seemed to make the reflections in the rearview mirror intensify, as if, somehow, I was being guided by that presence. I could no longer trust what I saw. With every quick glance at the rearview mirror, it seemed like something was there, something that didn't belong in that world, but was trapped between the reflection and reality. The road, which before seemed to be just a simple path, now became a place of tension, as if it had transformed into an endless corridor, where the presence moved at my mercy. I don't know what that was. I don't know if I was seeing things, if my tiredness led me into a state of delirium, or if, somehow, there was something supernatural accompanying me on that road. What I do know is that, to this day, I can't forget what I saw in the rearview mirror. No matter how many times I traveled those roads after that day, I always felt like something was watching me. Always. And with every turn, with every new reflection in the glass, I can't help but wonder, who, or what, was really behind me that night. I've been driving this road for years, but I've never been able to get used to the absolute silence at night. The long lonely journeys, the endless kilometers, the feeling that you are far from everything and everyone, it's always the same thing. Sometimes I hear stories from other truck drivers during stops. They talk about a driver who mysteriously disappeared many years ago. They say that, at night, the spirit of this driver appears, in the form of a ghost truck, and begins to follow other drivers along the deserted road. I always thought of these stories as just superstition, something they did to stave off boredom, but, something that night made my skin crawl. I was going along a stretch of road I know well, a place where the path seems to have no end. The moon was full, illuminating the road with a cold, eerie light, and my truck's headlights cut through the darkness. Everything seemed normal, until I started hearing the sound of an engine behind me. At first, I thought it was another truck, someone catching up to me. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw only darkness. But the sound continued, and it seemed to get louder, closer. My heart started to beat faster. There was no one on the road, I knew that. And yet, The sound of the engine was there, as if something was following me, without me being able to see it. I looked to the side, trying to see if there were any other vehicles, but the road was completely empty. The sound of the engine continued, and my stomach began to tighten. I remembered the stories I heard. Some drivers said that whoever was followed by the ghost truck met a tragic death. I laughed about it at the time, but now, with that sound echoing down the road, I could no longer ignore it. With every kilometer, the sound seemed to get closer, more ominous. I sped up the truck, trying to escape the feeling of being hunted, but the sound didn't stop, it only intensified. Fear started to take over me. I knew I was alone on that road, but the sound of another engine, so close, felt real. I looked in the rearview mirror again, and then I saw it. It wasn't possible. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing, but there it was, the light of another truck, right behind me. The headlight was bright, blinding, as if it were following me closely. I sped up even more, but the feeling of being caught up was inescapable. The truck wasn't just behind me, it seemed to be following me, watching me. I knew that, somewhere back there, something was happening. Something that could not be explained. The sound of the engine behind me was now deafening. I looked in the rearview mirror again, expecting to see the truck approaching, but to my surprise, it disappeared. There was no longer any light behind me. The road was empty again, but the fear didn't go away. My body was tense, eyes fixed on the road ahead, searching for any sign of anything. I accelerated even more, but something told me it wouldn't help. I was being followed by something that had no explanation. The story of the ghost driver that I thought was just a legend was now coming to life, and the worst thing was that, somehow, I knew that the spirit of this driver was watching me, waiting for me. With each kilometer, the discomfort only increased. I tried turning on the radio, trying to distract myself, but all I got was static. When I finally found a radio station, the voice that spoke over the speaker made me freeze. "If you're hearing this, you know he's after you. Don't try to escape." The voice seemed distant but clear, as if it were coming from a very close place, and at the same time, from another world. The feeling that something was hunting me, something supernatural, never left me. I felt pressure in my chest, as if the road was trying to swallow me, as if the asphalt itself was becoming a prison. Suddenly, an intense light appeared in the rearview mirror. It was the ghost truck, now much closer, the blinding light reflecting in my windows. I couldn't see the driver, but I knew he was there, following me with frightening precision. I tried to brake, but the truck was so close it felt like it was right up against my bumper. The feeling of being followed by something that wasn't real came over me. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. It was as if fear had taken over me, freezing my vocal cords. The truck was still there, so close that I could barely see the road ahead. I finally stopped the truck on the side of the road, not knowing what to do. My truck's engine was failing, the sound of the ghost truck was still resonating in my mind, and the feeling that it was somewhere around me hadn't left me. I looked around, hoping to see something, someone, but the road was deserted, only the silence of the night filling the space. I didn't know if I was losing my sanity or if something was really following me, but I knew that, at that moment, I was no longer alone. The truck was there, parked next to me, waiting. I felt it, as if he was waiting for my movement, as if he was challenging me to continue the journey. The silence lasted for a few minutes, but there was no relief. I was paralyzed, my heart was pounding, and my mind was trying to process what was happening. It was then that I heard the sound of the engine again, but this time, it was much further away. As if he were leaving. I took a deep breath, but I didn't know if that was a sign that the worst was over, or if I was just preparing myself for what came next. I looked in the rearview mirror, but didn't see anything. The ghost truck was gone, but the feeling of being followed didn't go away. I knew something was watching me, waiting for me. Still with my heart racing, I restarted the engine and started driving again, but every kilometer that passed felt heavier, as if the road was closing in around me. I was trying to convince myself that it had all been a delusion, a mixture of tiredness and fear. But, with each curve, with each new stretch, I felt that the driver's spirit was still there, somewhere, lurking, waiting. The road seemed to stretch infinitely, as if there was no end, as if I were trapped in a cycle that I couldn't escape. It was then that, as I made a sharper turn, I saw something in the distance. A light. The truck was there again, but this time it was stopped, as if it was waiting for me. I tried to speed up, but no matter what I did, it felt like the road was pulling me towards that spot, like it was a trap. The light of the ghost truck shone in the darkness, and I realized there was no way to escape anymore. The spirit was guiding me, dragging me to an unknown destination. The legend was not just a story. He was following me to lead me to something much worse. The road, the truck's light, the engine, everything seemed to merge into a single sensation of dread. I didn't know what to do. When I looked at the rearview mirror once more, the driver's figure finally appeared. He was there, perfectly visible, his silhouette unmistakable, his expression blank, as if he were no longer human. The last thing I saw was his hand raised, like a warning, before the ghost truck melted into the darkness. I don't know how, but at that moment, I realized my fate was sealed. When I woke up, I was no longer driving, and the road in front of me had disappeared. Only silence remained for me, and the feeling that the legend, somehow, was still alive inside me.